as sweeter than all. Good morning. Good to see everybody. We've been looking at some questions from a book that was written back in '51 by Leroy Brownlow. That was the greatest questions of the Old Testament were on the third one, and I've found them pretty informative and inspiring. And things that I hadn't thought of, or ways that I hadn't thought of things. We're getting further into the creation account, and now we've got babies. Yeah, Cain and Abel. The question, if you do well, will you not be accepted? That has, that's always struck a chord with me because I identify with Cain. He was given all the right questions and all the opportunity to get things right, and he went and did the stupid thing anyway. And that's me. All the answers, still doing the stupid. Genesis 4, the first 7 verses. Eddie, did you tell me not to use this today? I can't remember.
Nope.
Okay, so I can try it.
You can try it.
I was told that sometimes I get too quiet, so. How's that? Is it on?
No.
Oh, that's right. We were wondering if the battery had died.
Well, the light's on, so.
I'm assuming it's just not
It's on
connected
now.
properly to the system.
It is,
I can
Yeah.
hear it.
unless somebody changes it.
Do you want me to go mess with it, or do you
No.
not want to worry about it this morning?
Yeah, well.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just talk a little louder. In Genesis 4, 1-4, now Adam knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I've gotten a man with the help of the Lord. And again she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a worker of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground. And Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock, and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. The Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? And why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, and you must rule over it. Before we go even further, something strikes me in this account as potentially very, very important. And so it's guided my interpretation of it for as long as I've been reading it. And that is that it says that Abel brought of the firstborn of his flock, but does not use the same type of language as the sort of first fruits of Cain's. Whether that is meaningful or not is up to you to decide. I find it meaningful. I find in it the implication that whatever it was you were doing for the Lord, it needed to be the best. It needed to be the best of what you could come up with. The best of the flock is a sacrifice for you, and the best of the fruit of the ground is a sacrifice for you if you were a farmer. Right? We've got the farmers and the ranchers right here, don't we? Whether that is meaningful to you is for you to decide, since we do not have all the details, do we? If you do well, will you not be accepted? What where we come into this is we come into this with God reasoning with him. God's reasoning with Cain. And some things come out. We'll talk about those things. Some things come out when we're out of this conversation and out of this situation. There are other questions, are there not? Why are you angry? Why has your face fallen? Those questions can't be dissociated from the main question of the lesson. If you do well, will you not be accepted? All the questions. These are preventive. These are both diagnosing a problem and preventing further problems. You ever looked at this account and wondered, what does this say about mental health? What does this say about our the state of mental health? To me, it says a lot of the things that we have problems with, we've done them to ourselves. And it's a matter of getting to the heart of the matter to help us avoid future problems. The questions help Cain to diagnose, but he has to look inward. He has to look inward and he has to look honestly. The questions are preventive of further issues. But we know the ending, don't we? We know the ending. Stephen King writes a story, Cain rose up. Cain rose. Probably that's the way the King James Version says it. Cain rose up and slew his brother. How often is it when the problem is with me or the problem is with you, but I want to blame somebody else and you want to blame somebody else? And the people who said never do not have a shred of honesty in them. Because we do it. The trick is to not do it. What does Psalm 51 say? And David is coming to God after adultery and murder in Psalm 51, and he says, you desire truth in the innermost parts. God wants Cain to be honest with himself. The reason that he is angry and jealous is because he didn't do the right thing. Now, we don't know exactly what that wrong thing was. I've given you a suggestion. Maybe he was supposed to, this is something I've heard, maybe he was supposed to trade some of the good stuff from the ground to get another animal. Maybe he was supposed to barter with Abel and get an animal of his own to sacrifice. That's an option too. We don't know. But how often do we lash out at others because of our own sins? In 1 John 3:11, maybe this is a pretty summative assessment of the situation for Cain and Abel. It says, "For this is the message that you heard from the beginning, that we should love one another. We should not be like Cain, who was of the evil one and murdered his brother." Remember what Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount? Angry with your brother without cause. How about angry with your brother because of a stupid cause? Because some people go, well, I've got reason to be angry with my brother. Therefore, I'm justified in being hateful. Okay, angry with your brother because you're stupid. How about that? We should not be like Cain, who was of the evil one and murdered his brother. And why did he murder him? Because his own deeds were evil, and his brothers righteous. Guilty conscience. And sometimes we deflect, do we not? I'm with you. I'm stupid too. What else do we learn from these questions? We learn a few things, and there's some overlap in them. One is that God has the right. God has the right to accept or reject any offering made by a person. It's in God's court, so to speak, to do the accepting and the rejecting. It's like I like the way that the book puts it. It's not as if God's like a beggar, right? A beggar just waiting for crumbs to drop, and whatever crumbs may drop, God's like, yeah, I got something. Right? God's not a beggar accepting crumbs, and so it behooves us. And that puts the ball into our court that we got to figure out, well, what does God really want? It's on you to figure out the acceptable service or the acceptable worship or the acceptable sacrifice. We do that through revelation, don't we? We do that through the Word. To illustrate the point, you could turn to Acts 17 if you wanted to. Because what Paul is saying to the Greeks on Mars Hill is that there's a very real sense in which God doesn't need anything from anybody. In which God is totally, self-dependent. He's obviously self-existent. Right? He does not, he's not depending on us. Now, we could talk. We have that God is blessed by our behaviors or hurt by our behaviors. God desires our sacrifices. He wants what we can bring him. But when you put it this way, it definitely gives you pause and you go, all right, this means that there's going to have to be some care taken and thought given to figure out how I please God on God's terms. Here in Acts 17, the God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. In Isaiah 55, we go to these two verses a lot. And it's just a kind of a universal sort of blanket statement. There's a context. The context is fantastic. It's beautiful, and it's talking about all the things that God wanted to bless the Israelites. Right? But in the process, in verses 8 and 9 of Isaiah 55, he says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." Once in a while, we might feel like that's a problem, but that's really supposed to be a beautiful thing. Kind of along the same lines as that idea that God can accept and God can reject, is that what pleases man doesn't necessarily please God. In other words, and this is an easy trap. We see it. We would not have the denominations in this world that we have if it were not so. The false doctrine that characterizes the, quote, religious world, we wouldn't have it if this weren't so. And we ourselves wouldn't fall into, to the trap if it wasn't such a big trap and a big temptation. And that is just because you're sincere and just because you got real strong feelers about something doesn't mean, by virtue of the strength of those feelings or of those desires, does not mean that God just matches up, that God just aligns himself with you just because you have a strong emotion, and you've got like an idea of devotion. Right? The strength of your love of something does not require God to fall in step with you. Right? We fall in step with God. Right? And so, but because of the ease of falling into that trap, because of that, we got every tradition, right? And we got the 31 flavors of religion, right, all around us. And so we consider traditions, like in Mark 7. In Mark 7, he's talking to the Pharisees, and they had their traditions. And we don't tear down tradition for tradition's sake, but we analyze tradition to figure out if they're godly traditions, if they're not just things that people have come up with to make themselves feel important or distinct or better than. We consider our traditions. Mark 7, 6 through 8. And he said to them, "Well did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites, as it is written, this people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. You leave the commandment of God and hold to the tradition of men." Yeah, we have it. Some of us grew up in the churches of Christ, right? And that tradition that was maybe in the 80s that was like, we're going to sing the first and the second and the fourth verse of the invitation song, right? That's so like the whole generation didn't know verse 3 of some of these songs, right? Was it a sin? No. Did some people act like it was a sin when you decided to sing verse 3? Yeah. There you got a problem. There you got a problem with a man-made tradition. And dare I say, stupid tradition. Right? Oh, there was one that made me mad. 277 in Sacred Selections. I love to tell the story. Because the one that got skipped was the one that said, "I love to tell the story, for those who know it best seem hungering and thirsting to hear it like the rest." And I was like, that's such a neat idea, and I don't want to skip that idea. Anyway, not all traditions are sinful, but sometimes it's the binding of them on other people and the heels digging in when it comes to them that is the problem. There's a principle at stake. This verse in Proverbs 14:12 is the same as 16:25. Proverbs 14:12 and 16:25 match identically. The principle is, and this is what I was trying to say, is we're not going to do something, forge ahead and say, "God, you get in line with me." We're going to be in line with God and forge ahead that way. All right. In Proverbs 14:12 it says, "There's a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way to death." The strength of conviction is a good thing, but it's not going to force God to get in line with you if it's a wrong conviction. Sincerity is a good thing. A lot of sincere people Romans 10, Paul talks about the people that he knew and loved, the people that he grew up with, the people that were his whole world. Were hellbound, were bound for destruction. In Romans 10, he says, they have a zeal, but not according to knowledge. He says, my heart's desire is for their salvation. Therefore, he was saying, they're not saved anymore. They're not the people of God anymore. And all this suggests the sovereignty of God. So sovereignty is a word like the authority, right? Authority, power, prerogative, preeminence. There's a lot. Nebuchadnezzar, right? Nebuchadnezzar had a lot of problems, right? He did the whole fiery furnace thing with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He did, but later in his reign, he said some things that offended the living God, and God said, I'll show you who's in charge. You get to act like a cow for 7 years. You get to roam around in the field. We'll put you out back where people don't see you as much. And you get to eat grass and live like a cow for 7 years. And after that time, after that ordeal, this is what Nebuchadnezzar says. At the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my reason returned to me. And I blessed the Most High, and praised and honored him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing. And he does according to his will among the host of the heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth. And none can stay his hand or say to him, well, what have you done? A little bit like Job, huh? Jeremiah, a little bit later, Jeremiah is going to say something that's guided many of us for many years, and that's just recognizing that it's not in your best interest to guide your own steps. It's not in your best interest to be the human pioneer in this situation and forge your own way to the exclusion of God. Jeremiah 10:23 and 24. I know, Lord, that the way of man is not in himself, that it is not in man who walks to direct his steps. Correct me, O Lord, but in justice, not in your anger, lest you bring me to nothing. Proverbs 8:33 through 36. Proverbs 8:33 through 36. He's going to end up saying, when you ignore the commandment, right? Because that's kind of, when we think back to Genesis 4, we've got Cain is upset, and God says, if you do well, if you do the right thing, your face will be lifted up. It'll be better for you. Cain's hurting himself. He's already hurting himself. And then he's going to hurt himself even more by hurting his brother. Proverbs 8:33. Hear instruction and be wise, and do not neglect it. Blessed is the one who listens to me, watching daily at my gates, waiting beside my doors. For whoever finds me finds life, and obtains favor from the Lord. Finds me, I think, would be wisdom and instruction. But he who fails to find me injures himself. All who hate me love death. Hurting yourself. God accepts or rejects every person, right? Genesis 4, back to there. Will you not be accepted? God says. And God says the same thing to everybody. And this vision that John had, he sees that God is accepting or rejecting every person based on what they do. Revelation 20:12. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books were opened. Then another book was opened, which is the book of life, and the dead were judged by what was written in the books, according to what they had done. We must do well. At the end of Ecclesiastes, I like seeing what different translations do with the end of Ecclesiastes. Some say this applies to every person. Some say this is the whole of man, or the whole duty of man. I really like the one, I don't know if it's a New King James. It says this is the whole of man. Like this is like the sum total of man is to fear God and keep His commandments. Ecclesiastes 12:13, the end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep His commandments. For this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. I figured out which version is that? That says the whole of man. Micah 6:8. Some of you probably got this on your bathroom wall. Or on your entry hall. In your entry hall. Micah 6:8. He has told you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. And then the alternative. And this is that. Don't ask God to get in line with you. You get in line with God. Thing all over again here at the end of the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 7. Matthew 7, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, didn't we prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do many mighty works in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. Can you imagine? This isn't just the strength of conviction. This is the strength of actions. Actions that we would generally think of as good. Making sure that we're in line with God. Sin is there for those who don't do well. That's how Genesis 4:7 ends. If you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door, and its desire is for you, but you must master it. That's the first time it's mentioned in the Bible, sin. It's not the first sin in the Bible, but it's the first time sin is mentioned in the Bible. 1 Peter 5:8, that's real strong, right? The devil prowls around like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour, right? Well, when you got the like or as in there, that's called a simile. The devil is like a lion. Right? Here, it's super strong. Super strong. It's personified. It's like a beast. That's think of the horror movies where somebody's just standing right behind the door. Something is right there or right above the doorway, to pounce, right? Sin is crouching at the door, and its desire is for you, but you must master it. I already told you I like it. I don't know, I like this whole thing for an awful reason. How awful to identify with Cain. This is scary. It's scary to think that God Himself says that you can master. You can master sin. I don't want to believe it because I struggle with it. And on the other, but Paul even says, I'm not doing the things that I know I need to be doing. There are sins of commission, right? Things that you do, 1 John 3. Everyone who makes a practice of sinning also practices lawlessness. Sin is lawlessness. You know that he appeared in order to take away sins, and in him there is no sin. No one who abides in him keeps on sinning. No one who keeps on sinning has either seen him or known him. And sins of omission. In James 4:17. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. To wrap it up, also one more place in James chapter 1. Sin is personified as a beast that'll tear you apart. And just like Cain, all right, it wasn't good. Right? It wasn't good that he was angry. But boy, to double down and add murder to that, that's sin growing worse and worse, and it can grow worse and worse with us. As with Cain, it will grow worse and worse for you. In James chapter 1, we've got sort of the blessing and the curse we curse ourselves with. Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, I'm being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. There. Sin is personified again. Lured and enticed by his own desire. Then desire, when it has conceived, gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. What we call that? The second death. The second death. We'll stop there, and we'll remind ourselves that if we do well, our countenance will be lifted up. Stop the blame and stop the rage and the lashing out, and take care of yourself first and foremost. Pay attention to who you are, what you're doing, and get in line with God. If you have a need, please let us know. So we stand and sing.
Someday you'll stand at the bar.